Hello, this is Mrs. Brown, and today we're going to look at absolute value equations, part 2. So, to review, absolute value means it's the distance from 0, and no matter what, when I take the absolute value, it always comes out positive. So if I have a negative 3, the absolute value is 3 because negative 3 is 3 away from 0. If I have positive 3, it's also going to have an absolute value of 3 because it's 3 away from 0. So inside, it can be positive or negative, but once I take the absolute value, it has to be a positive number. All right, when you're taking a look at this equation, remember that I have to get the absolute value isolated before I continue, so I have to get rid of the plus 5 and the 2 times. Well, if I had an equation that looked like this, instead of the absolute value, you would say to yourself, okay, I have to get rid of the plus 5 first by subtracting 5, and then you were going to divide by 2. This is the same procedure, and this is what you're used to seeing. Now we're just saying, okay, we got to do the same thing, but we got to isolate that absolute value just like I normally isolate a variable. Okay, so the first thing is to subtract 5 from both sides. That's going to give me 0 and 6. 2 times my absolute value of n minus 3 equals 6. Then the opposite of multiplying by 2 would be dividing by 2. Those are going to cancel because 2 divided by 2 is 1. You got the absolute value of n minus 3 equals 3. Now we've got the absolute value all by itself on this side. This is where I'm going to look at this side. Is it a positive number? Yes, that means I can solve it. So I'm going to split it into 2 pieces. So remember that this inside can come out to a 3, or this can come out to negative 3. Because both of negative 3 and 3 are going to have an absolute value of 3. So I look at those 2 possibilities. So n minus 3 can equal negative 3, or n minus 3 can equal 3. And I'm going to solve both. When I do n minus 3, I'm going to do the opposite, which is adding 3. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0 because they're opposites. This is opposite, so n equals 0. Or, okay, I add 3 to both sides. So n equals, that's going to come out to 6. So my 2 answers would be n equals 0 or n equals 6. Okay, if I substitute this back in, 0 minus 3 is going to be negative 3. Okay, I take the absolute value, I get 3. Times 2 is 6, plus 5 is 11. If I substitute in 6, 6 minus 3 is 3. The absolute value of 3 is 3. Times 2 is 6. Plus 5 is 11. So it works for either of them. All right, let's take a look at this one. Again, I'm looking at my absolute value. It's not isolated. There's this plus 5. How do I get rid of a plus 5 so I can get this all by itself? Well, I subtract 5. Okay, 5 minus 5 is 0. I'm left with x minus 1. That's kind of a long one. On that side, 2 minus 5 is negative 3. And now that my absolute value is completely isolated, I look over here and I have a negative number. Well, I know my absolute value has to come out positive when it's outside, so this is not possible. So remember, we call that no solution. So when I have my absolute value, if the other side is negative, once this is isolated, there's no solution. There's no number because it has to come out positive when I take absolute value. Let's look at a couple of other examples. Okay. Now, what happens if I have an absolute value sign on both sides? Ooh. Okay. So, let's say I have this problem. I've got the absolute value equals the absolute value. Well, it's basically going to be starting the same way. There's going to be 2 possibilities that we're going to look at. So this first one, we're going to leave as is. We're going to leave it as 2x plus 8. And we're going to split it, and we're going to put 2x plus 8 over here. And then this side, we're going to look at the positive value and then the opposite of 10x. So in other words, this is going to be negative 10x. So notice that just like in all the other problems, we're taking this, we're putting it here, we're putting it here, and then we're taking this and making it the positive version and the negative version. So even though there's 2 absolute value signs, it's really the same process that we've been using. and then I'm going to solve it. Well, here, notice that I've got variables on both sides. So I want to fix that so all my variables are on one side. So I can either move the 2x or the minus 10x. Since this has another number with it, the constant, the plus 8, I'm probably going to go ahead and move the 2. Now, normally I like to move it so that I get a positive coefficient, but it makes way more sense in this one to move the 2. So I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides. 2x minus 2x is nothing. I have 8 left over. Negative 10 and minus 2, so it's like I've got two negatives I'm adding together, so that's getting more negative, so it's negative 12x. Okay, from there, do what I normally do. It's negative 12x times x, so the opposite of multiplication is division. I'm going to divide by negative 12. Negative 12 divided by negative 12 is 1, so I'm left with x. Okay, this is going to be less than 1. And as I'm looking that this is both divisible by 4, so I'm going to simplify it. 4 goes in twice, and 4 goes in 3 times, and there's one positive and one negative, so the fraction is going to be negative. So negative 2/3 is one possible answer. And then I'm going to go over here and take a look at this one. Again, I've got variables on both sides, so I want to start by moving my 2x over. I've got left with 8. Okay, 10 minus 2 is 8. So when I divide by 8, I get x equaling 1. Now, there is something that we need to do. We need to check and make sure that both of these answers work, because they might not. We might have what we call an extraneous solution. And an extraneous solution just means that one of them looks like it could be an answer, but it isn't actually when you put it in. So I'm going to start with the easy one of 1. So if I do 2 times 1 plus 8 and take the absolute value, does that equal 10 times 1 absolute value? Well, 2 times 1 is 2, plus 8 is 10, and the absolute value of 10 is 10. 10 times 1 is 10, and the absolute value of 10 is 10. So 1 definitely checks out as a solution. Let's try negative 2/3. Okay, I'm going to erase this arrow so I have some space. So 2 times negative 2/3 plus 8, and I'm going to take the absolute value. And I'm going to put in here 10 times negative 2/3, and it's also absolute value. And actually, it's going to be a lot easier if I move this, because we're going to do that out a little bit. All right, so 2 times negative 2 is negative 4 over 3 plus 8. And I'm checking to see if it's equal to this. Well, 10 times negative 2 is negative 20 thirds. That's not going to divide evenly, so I'm not going to mess with it. When I'm adding, remember, I need to have a common denominator. So 8 is going to have a denominator of 3. Okay, remember right now it's like 8 over 1. So I times by 3, I times by 3. So that's 24. And I get negative 4 over 3 plus 24 thirds. So negative 4 plus 24 is 20, positive 20 thirds. Okay. And when I take the absolute value, remember it has to be positive. So both of these come out to 20 thirds. Okay, so it checks out. So both of our answers worked this time. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes one of them doesn't work. It's extraneous. It doesn't come out where these two would be equal. Okay, so that one definitely worked. Not necessarily friendly numbers, but it definitely worked out like that. All right, let's look at one more example before we finish up. Let's say I have the absolute value of 3n minus 2 equaling 2 times n plus 2. Oh no, look, I can't isolate the absolute value. It's okay, we still got it handled. Okay, I've got absolute value on both sides, and I've got this pesky 2. Okay, it's cool though. We're still going to split this into two possibilities. This side we're going to take, and we're just going to rewrite as the n minus 2 as is. And when we split it into 2, equals, I'm going to put the 2 down. Okay. And I need to, because remember this is a grouping symbol, I'm going to put what's here, the positive version, in parentheses, because I'm going to have to distribute. And I'm also going to put it as a negative. Okay. So what I'm doing is saying the opposite of whatever n plus 2 is. And so I have to distribute that negative in order to make it happen. Let's start with a positive case. I'm going to distribute. I get 3n minus 2 equals, and then 2 times n is 2n, and 2 times 2 is 4. Okay. From there, I want to move all my variables to one side. I've got positive 3 and positive 2. So if I move the 2n, that means that I'll have a positive coefficient, so that's just 1n, which is n. Left with 4 on the other side. Add 2 to both sides. That cancels because they're opposites, and I get n equals 6. So now I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to start by distributing that negative. So I got 3n minus 2 equals 2 times negative. It's like a negative 1, so a negative 1 times n is negative n. Plus negative 1 times positive 2 is like a negative 2. Okay. You could also write this as minus 2 instead of adding a negative 2. Either one's going to be equivalent. Now I'm going to distribute my 2. So 2 times negative 1 is negative 2n, plus negative 2 times negative 2 is going to be negative 4. So again, now I need to get all my variables to one side. I can either move the negative 2n or the positive 3n, since if I move this, I get a positive coefficient. I am going to add 2n to both sides, and that way the number in front of the variable is going to be positive. If I was dealing with inequalities, then I wouldn't have to worry about flipping. So it's just going to make life easier later on. So 2 plus 3 is 5. So 5 times mystery number equals 2, or minus 2 equals negative 4. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. I get 5 times mystery number equals negative 2, divide by 5. And so n equals negative 2/5. Now, once again, I have to go in and check and make sure that these are actually both workable answers. And so, again, these kind of problems are going to take a lot more steps. So 3 times 6 minus 2. Okay, that comes out to 18 minus 2 is 16, so the absolute value is 16. Okay, this would be 2 times, and then we've got 6 plus 2. If I put in 6, that's 8, times 2 is 16. So the absolute value of 8 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. Absolute value of 16 is 16. So that one definitely works. Now let's free up a little bit of space. I'm going to go in and try the 2/5. Negative 2/5, so 3, let's make it 3 over 1 times negative 2/5 minus 2, the absolute value. Does that equal 2 times, and then that would be negative 2/5 plus 2. And I'm going to need a little bit more space than I had allotted for sure. Okay, so I multiply this out. I get negative 6/5. I'm going to go ahead and get my common denominator. This is like 2 over 1, so that's 5 times 5 times 5 is 10. It's a negative minus another number, so it's like adding. So it's negative 16/5 absolute value. Over here, I'm going to get 2 times the absolute value of something. Okay, so again, I'm going to have to make this a common denominator. I get negative 2/5 plus, this will be 5. 5 times 1, so 5 times 2 is 10. Okay, negative 2 plus 10 is going to be 8/5. Okay, so I'm going to take the absolute value of 8/5, which is 8/5, and times it by 2 over 1. The absolute value of negative 16/5 is 16/5. And so when I do 2 times 8, I get 16. It works. I don't have any extra extraneous solutions, and so I am all done. There's 2 answers, 6 and negative 2/5. Okay, I hope this helps, and have a great day.